Welcome to the AI Corner. I'm your host, Mike Bailey, here to spotlight the people shaping New Zealand's AI future. In today's episode, we're speaking with Frances Valintine, who is the founder of academyEX and one of New Zealand's most influential voices in education and technology. Frances has spent over 25 years reshaping how New Zealanders learn and work, from founding the Mind Lab to preparing leaders for the future of work, sustainability, and rapid technological change. Welcome to the pod, Frances.
Great to be here, Mike.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. You've been in the technology space for some time, and it's probably never been more exciting than it is today, but I'd love to hear your perspective on what you saw pre the ChatGPT launch of 3.5 back in November 30th, 2022, and what you've seen since then.
Yeah, it may even go further back, I think, just to give you a sort of insight to where my journey started, because I came back into New Zealand in the late 90s from living offshore and realizing we'd moved into this internet age. And it was really where mainstream adoption of internet, we were moving away from floppies and zip disks, away from big beige computers to some more sophisticated computers. And I was at the beginning of when the creative technology industry started to emerge in New Zealand. And actually, I saw at that point something similar where a technology shaped a whole industry and we started becoming known in the world for what we could do for creative technologies. And so I sort of had that as a backdrop almost 30 years ago. And then I go today, when we led up to the launch of ChatGPT back in, it would say 3 years ago, there was all the talk about what AI would do in the future. And we had many examples of computer vision. We were doing natural language processing. There was lots going on. But the generative AI piece was not the focus area. People were not necessarily. There were some very early indicators through things like prompt to image, which were really basic. But they were sort of the only thing up until day back in, 3 years ago in November, when suddenly it was real. And for me, it was very similar to 2007, where iPhone 1 was dropped by Apple. Up until then, we only could imagine a flip phone or a Nokia or a Motorola phone that was a phone. And this idea of ever imagining talking to someone on video on your camera on your phone was so sci-fi. Just incredible to think that how far we've progressed in that time since 2007. This is the same moment all over again, because 3 years ago, the world shifted.
It's crazy the way it's changed. I guess one of the concerns or thoughts that goes through my head is that when the internet came out, everyone ran to build a website, and then when the iPhone came out, everyone ran to build an application. And I guess what we see nowadays is everyone's running to build an agent, and there's a bit of a paradigm shift around why do I need an agent? What problem is it solving? The same way we had the same questions coming up for websites and apps. Do you feel that we're making the right choices, societally speaking, or in business, around how we should be approaching AI? Do you think we're making that paradigm shift of what the possibilities are, or is it too early to say as to where we should be focusing efforts?
Look, I think there are many ways I could answer this question. So if I take it on a local basis, if we take it within New Zealand and the context that we have, which is not dissimilar globally, we have an economy that's not doing well. We have a talent shortage of people doing great things. We have a productivity issue that's been going on for many generations. We have a digitization challenge that we're not as digital as we should be if we want to sell more things to more people, and which goes into exports and competitiveness. And then we want to retain great people who are trained in this country, and we want to make sure the best of the best stay. If you put all those things together, AI is a gift, because it enables smaller businesses to do more things, to be more personalized, to be able to digitize in a way, to respond. And an agent is a good example. Chatbot just didn't cut the mustard. First of all, a lot of training for very little gain. If you look at agentic models today in AI, they are doing the heavy lifting of customer service. They're providing their 24-hour responsiveness to product inquiries and orders. You have reach that you couldn't have before. You don't have this having to be on 24 hours a day as a small business owner. It addresses the economy issues, which is how do I do more for less money? It also addresses talent, and the cost of good talent is really hard to find and really hard to fund. So I actually think the gift that AI is bringing has not been adopted fast enough. And I think if any business has any online presence at all, then building an agent makes total sense to me, particularly if it does some of those things that are typically an owner of a business would have to do, or they'd have to hire someone that they find hard to fund because it takes away the margin for them to stay sustainable as a business. So yeah, I think it's about more people need to do this, not less.
And we've got to start experimenting and learning and seeing what works and arguably cutting out the manual tasks in the back end of the business, which frees up space for people to think about. Whereas the new business model opportunity that perhaps they haven't been able to explore because they're so focused on doing their day-to-day work. So
Yeah, I mean, the same way Zero, took away so many pain points for New Zealand businesses around, automating their payments and actually invoicing became less of a challenge. Following up people who hadn't paid on time. Suddenly that wasn't hours a week that individuals had to go and find to do things that were very mundane. In many cases, they were unskilled to do. And now there are tools that do it. It's a tool that really takes away some of those pain points.
what are some of the blockers you see that we're not taking advantage of the technology as quickly as we should be within this country in particular?
Well, I think it comes back to the fact that we are small and medium-sized businesses. The vast majority of people, over 90% of the workforce are working in SMEs, and a lot of those are working for themselves as sole traders. And so there isn't necessarily the competition that we have in other markets where you're constantly trying to be as good or better than your competition. A lot of people are very comfortable with just the amount of business they have, even though it may not technically be described as a business because it's really only just funding enough of a lifestyle to live on. I think the other thing is the age of business owners typically are 40 plus, and a lot of people in that group have already decided that AI is not for them. It's sort of for a different generation, or it's for IT people, and not really understanding this is probably the easiest technology to get hold of. There's just no kind of tension or pressure around having to invest capital. There's no capital outlay. You just need a laptop or a phone and an internet connection. So if you think of it that way, if you don't really have any barrier to entrance, and the only barrier is your mindset around, is this for me or not, or can I do this or not? I think at the moment our adoption is very focused on that younger group. The under 30s are significantly faster adopters and bigger users of AI than the over 30s. My dream and my role is that everybody equally looks at this as a tool like the internet that we all just have to adopt to, move to, and actually get pretty comfortable using every day.
I'd love to come back to the different demographics and how they think about AI. And just for a second, as you say, that the tools are ridiculously cheap in terms of the value that you can get and see from them. I have this theory that the fact that everybody has Microsoft or Google in their business is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it puts the power of AI into the majority of businesses because that's where most people have their workbench at the end of the day. But I also feel it's potentially a curse because then we're vendor-led with our approach, because all we're being exposed to is I get my Copilot or I get my Google and Gemini kind of stack internally, and I'm only being drip fed what those businesses want me to do or to be exposed to. And I think that actually starts to limit our ability to see where all the other opportunities are across the AI stack. And especially as a country at the bottom of the globe, we tend to be last on those roadmaps, even if we're first for some experimentation in some markets. But that geographical distance and lack of opportunity for those businesses means we don't actually get the most innovative solutions necessarily. And I fear that a lot of businesses are going to go, we've got Copilot, we're done, we've got AI, this is what we need to do. But I think we start to get into the space where we go, I'm just doing the same thing faster. I'm not actually doing something different and thinking about how I just get rid of the process I was previously doing and rethink the way that we operate as a business. I don't know if any of that resonates to you.
Yeah, it does. I think there's, again, different ways. I mean, companies who have Copilot typically are at the top end of town. So, the larger they're enterprise-based, they're typically corporates, multinationals, and they, in some ways, are the slowest to adopt AI formally. So lots more rigor around who gets to have it, probably less experimentation, a lot more risk kind of aversion, locking it down, giving it access to less people, putting some pretty significant guardrails around any use. And I suspect in those companies, there's a lot of people acting outside of those parameters in their home life, and they're using a whole bunch more tools because they've had just enough of a taste of what it can do within the environment of this quite locked down world. And then at home, they're like, okay, we're going full out and going to try these things, but not able to bring it back into their environment. So there's sort of a two dual mode operating between sort of the ninjas at home and the samurai kind of traditional approach and safety, cautious, ritual-based inside the organization. Inside small businesses, I think there is a big difference between those who are tech-enabled, so young, tech, digitally enabled businesses, and that could be anything from e-commerce and retail to tourism to anything, not just a tech company, who are basically seeing this as give it a go, and really kind of taking almost a risky approach. I'm going to try everything, and we'll just keep pushing and poking until we figure out what works. And I think that group is a pretty small group, but probably the ones who are making the biggest gains right now. And then there's the group who just are oblivious. Like still, AI hasn't even really kind of come onto their radar beyond we're hearing in the news, or headlines, or people are talking about it at the pub, but it doesn't really affect me because I run a business. So I think
Exactly.
there's three kind of different groups I see. The decision makers are the ones that worry me the most. So if you're a senior leader of a decent sized company, or you're in governance and you don't know this inside out and back to front, and you're not a daily user and you're not experimenting, how in the earth do you plan for this era? Like that worries me, because you could literally have people who are making decisions that are going to affect a lot of people, including jobs, including things like infrastructure, including future of work responsibilities, policies, a whole range of things, who are sitting there going, I don't really understand this technology, but it won't be, it's not such a big deal that it's going to affect my decision. Instead of saying it's affecting every decision. Everything you do today has to have one part of that decision-making process that says, what does AI do to this? And
Absolutely.
yeah.
As you say, I think leaders have they've got a duty of care to their employees to at least be experimenting and upskilling on this, because inevitably their business will either cease to exist or just very, very slowly erode over a long period of time, unless they can make that mental leap and understand how not only how do the entry level workers start to upskill or get invited into their business. I mean, what is the role of an entry level worker these days if previously that role has been, call it grunt work, which is kind of codified knowledge that AI can perform. So they need to be thinking about complete role redesign as part of their entire organization, let alone their own position within the organization.
So true. Absolutely.
So how do you think about, you're in the education space, how do you think about taking leaders on that journey, and what is some of the frontline feedback that you're hearing as part of taking folks on that journey?
Yeah, so look, I ended up in education not as an educator, but as a technologist. So back in 97, so a long time ago in the journey. And actually, my commitment to the country was, if we are part of the world and we want to play in the world, and we're not just about primary industries, and we want to be about, what software products, what technical products, what hardware can we build here? Where are we going to get that knowledge from, given that the vast majority of people who live here only will have training in New Zealand? Those who go offshore for training typically leave the country. So if you're going to be a New Zealander trained in New Zealand for New Zealand, then how do you find the right type of information so that you are at the forefront? It's pretty easy when you're an undergrad, because you can just go and choose your university of choice and you can go and start your career. But nothing that I learned, I could say 20, 30 years ago, but even 10 years ago is relevant now. Even if you did a PhD in AI 5 years ago, your PhD would be completely irrelevant today. It would have, had some inklings of the truth, but it still would have enormous holes in it. So things have so fast. So my commitment was, how do we make sure that adults have a place to come so that they can continue to learn no matter where they are in life, while they still work full time, at the same time be part of a cohort of people who are also learning, so you don't feel like you're isolated. And so for me, when we're across, so we work with companies who are upskilling and looking across their entire workforce around AI development. We work with individuals who are the outliers inside their companies, who are trying to get ahead, to get a kind of a competitive advantage over their peers. We work with founders who are trying to reimagine their business. And I think everybody seems to be sort of having this view, if they've clocked into AI, they know that they're out of date. Like the moment that they understand the power, they have this, I'm in this, I'm experimenting, I'm doing things, but I also know it's running away fast. So I'm having to spend more and more time to understand. But they're also motivated by that, because they realize there's plenty of wins along the way. Because the more you know, the more you deploy, the more benefits you get. What amazes me is the number of people I'll talk to, and particularly in large organizations, and I'll say, are you an AI user? And they're like, yeah. And I said, if you rated yourself, how much of a user? And some will go, oh, I'm a super user. Like, I use it all the time. And I'm like, okay, tell me how you use it. And they're like, oh, we've got Copilot. And I was like, okay, beyond Copilot, what else do you do? And they're like, oh, no, we just do everything in Copilot. And so their perception is that that is a super user.
Yeah.
And then you talk to a young, sort of entrepreneurial tech startup or digital first company, they talk about the 30 tools they use, and they talk about all the kind of the processes and the systems and everything has been streamlined, and how everything that, the people aspect have been sort of smoothed out, and there's a human in the loop, but there's a lot of digitization and a lot of automation going on. And so they are literally have rewired their business from the ground up, and nothing like, and they still wouldn't call themselves a super user. They just kind of,
Absolutely.
they're still experimenting. So that's the fear. So when somebody says, "Oh yeah, I'm all over this," and then you prod it them a little bit and say, "Tell me about that."
Yeah, exactly.
That's not what you and I would go, "Oh yeah, you're a super user."
As you say, I think everybody's in it. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect, right?
Yep.
They're approaching the point or the peak of Mount Stupid, and then we head into the valley of despair when you realize that you don't know nothing, but there's a lot you don't know. And I suppose in a world where things are changing and innovating and rapidly evolving, if we're uncomfortable now not knowing what to do, no matter how much we learn, because it is evolving so quickly, is that just the new norm? Or do you feel we're going to get to a place where we will feel some level of comfort or just feel more comfortable with not actually knowing, and that ambiguity becomes the way we operate?
I think both are true. I think that the internet, if you think about the early days, there was so much hype around e-commerce and what it could do, and how you might do things. And then there was all the people got despondent because it didn't deliver on half the things it promised, and a lot of people lost a lot of money, and there was the dot-com crash. And I think, and then it stabilized, and then there were fewer companies doing it really well, and you started emerging those who were, payment companies, or those who were web build companies, or those who were back end or cloud companies. It sort of consolidated, and it became easier to follow. I think we're at a stage right now that, like a bit like .com, when there's so many companies doing so many things, they are all losing money pretty much. So eventually there's going to be a big shakeout, and there'll be probably another 6 to 8 big tech winners in the scheme of things. And they probably won't be all the same ones that have owned that tech advancement for the last 10 years. Some will be the same. I think there's some I would bet that will still be there, and there'll be others I'll be like, their time is done, and new entrants will come in. But in the end, you can't compete against some of these companies who are now paying 10, 20, 50, $100 million salaries to people who are AI researchers. I mean, which company can compete against that? Only others who are incredibly well funded and with shareholders who have got enough faith in the system that the companies know what they are doing. And there is potential big wins at the end of this journey. I think there's going to be a lot of winners, but there's going to be a huge number of losers who back the wrong horse. But in saying that, I think at the point when they consolidate down, the continuation of advance, it will continue to roll out, but we won't have to be jumping from one platform to another like we are right now. We're all a little bit all over the place, trying to kind of, and then we have the flavor of the week. This is my favorite new tool. Oh, until next week, and this is my new favorite tool. And it's really unproductive in a way when we're in this period where we're kind of jumping around trying to see which thing does the best. And I'm like many others, I'll put the same prompt into 2 or 3 different alternative engines and kind of which large language model gives me the best result. And then I'll go, okay, this is my preferred tool for today. And then it's evolving so quickly. So I do think we are going to get a plateau at some point where it will consolidate. The people who lost money will disappear. Some of them will be acquired, and they'll be invested in by some of the bigger ones. They'll kind of build up, and you'll end up with more multi-trillion-dollar companies, which only a few years ago, multi-dollar companies were unheard of. Trillion is just so much bigger number than a billion. And I think we don't really see that. And there's a lot of money in this right now, and it's flowing very freely by a lot of investment.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the first time that we've seen a global race with multi-trillion-dollar companies with a pretty advanced technology and an existing infrastructure that, bar OpenAI, can't really be captured or caught up by a new entrant. It's sort of the incumbents to lose in some way, shape, or form because they have such war chests in some way.
Yeah, I think Anthropic have a pretty good, they're playing pretty well, OpenAI. I think there's probably some of the coding ones like Lovable, some of these ones that are kind of emerging out of nowhere. They may be acquired and they may be sucked up by some of the big ones. But there's maybe, and I said this recently to another group, Apple is still potentially to play their card. Or maybe they are the loser. Maybe this is the end of the love affair with Apple, and they haven't got the product for the future, and actually they're going to be one of the casualties in this new world.
I think they need a serious ace up their sleeve. If you look at where, like, Google is just, in my mind, dominating across all areas at the moment. I mean,
100%.
workspace cloud application models. I initially thought it was going to be something of like an OpenAI Microsoft race, and Microsoft would have their own models, which they're beginning to develop now. But the more I see of what Google is doing across the entire part of its ecosystem, it's going to be a tough one. It's going to be a tough battle between OpenAI and Google in some way.
I think in my last few months, if I was a betting person, I would say I've moved from the view that there were going to be, more an open AI type of winner takes all to
Mm,
definitely saying Google is. So yeah, I should put a big disclaimer, as should you, that we are not
yeah.
providing financial advice here about investment. But yeah, I mean, Google aren't just across all the pieces; they're also producing the products that are actually over delivering.
That's
And
it.
so,
They've got distribution across all their vectors. And we're in September right now. In October, I'm sure it'll change again. But
no
you,
doubt.
you're playing an important role in the New Zealand ecosystem. But I'm curious as to what was it that you saw that universities and other institutions weren't providing that you felt we could offer a better solution to bring people into call it the future with a lot of the areas that you're training individuals on.
Well, we've been around for 12 years in a category that's kind of unique. So we are like a private university without the name university, because strangely enough, in New Zealand, the term university is only available to be used by public entities, which I find
Mm.
extraordinary because no other country has that limitation. So we operate in the same way as a university, but our student profile is so much older. And when I say older, I should probably say wiser, more experienced. Students are typically 35 to 55, which is a very different profile than a university who is really focused on undergrad. And even those who study their master's degrees typically come from an undergrad environment. We're quite the opposite. This is people who have left university a long time ago, if they went to university at all, and are coming to do master's degrees with us or postgraduate study because they realize their jobs need a different sort of insight or different experience. And so there was really a market that I didn't have to take away from someone. It was a market that was underserved. And I think, like any good business and any good operation, it's about finding a problem to solve that is real. And in our case, in New Zealand, if you wanted to become an adult learner without the kind of having to go on with a bunch of 20-year-olds, that your limitations are often to programs that are not credentialed or not quality, they're having qualifications against them. And unfortunately, people still value proof that you've done something. They still value that credential. And it's particularly important when you're doing governance or you want to live in another country. And you'll see that almost every migration requirement, visas will always have an element of show us that you've done a master's degree. And so, we expect the same for people coming here. So there's a lot of this sort of activity where we wanted to make sure it was really accessible to learn. And when it came to AI, even before 3 years ago, I have podcasts and videos from 10 years ago when I was talking about when AI comes. And I look back at it now. At the time, there were a lot of people saying, it's never going to happen. AI is never going to be mainstream. It's always going to be niche. It's going to be a whole bunch of computer science boffins and software engineers will get there, but nobody will really get into this whole artificial intelligence. And if I go back to those videos from years ago, I still believe then, as I do today, that you can see sometimes when a technology is evolving and what it promises, if it delivers, is going to be a massive game changer. And I believe that about AI from the day I first heard about it, discovered it, researched it more than 10 years ago. And so in some ways, 3 years ago, it was for me like an internal celebration of like, finally my credibility of all this talk is actually now people go, oh, I get it. Now I see. And of course, that was in the early days when, of course, AI was still pretty limiting to what it can do compared to now, which, as we know, it can do anything.
Yeah, there's a lot it can do, and there's a lot it can't do. But I think it's more that directionally speaking, it is going to be incredible when we can finally see it fully adopted across countries and companies and across the majority of the workforce. It's going to be a different year every year moving forward. But what do you think we should be doing more of in New Zealand? I mean, we seem to be stuck in this rut, economically speaking, as we say, and arguably there could be more done from the top down, from within the government. There's a lot we could be doing in the private sector as well. But where do you think the next sort of priorities are for us as a country to move forward and really take advantage of the technology?
I mean, our first challenge we have, I think, as a country is we're not ambitious enough. Companies, when they set up, are often thinking about getting to $1 million turnover, and they're quite happy with that. They, sort of feel like it's a good success for their business. They've done well. Unfortunately, when we operate in a world where, we do have trillion-dollar businesses, that type of business is always going to be a risky business because one big competitor opens down the road can completely annihilate you. And so if we were more ambitious and we wanted to say, okay, I'm going to start a business and I want to turn it into a $100 million business within 5 or 10 years, what would it take? And so you set up first with this growth mindset, which means digital first, which will now mean AI first, which would mean how do I get the very best talent I could possibly find and recruit? Not who do I know down, who are my mates and what could they do? It's a big problem we have around that. Hiring friends, but all family. And then saying, how would this business proposition look like to a venture capitalist or an investor who is savvy? How would I convince a seasoned investment person or fund to say, this company is doing something truly unique? Now, New Zealand has so many unfair advantages that we don't play to. For example, the one that always stays in my mind is we produce the most incredible food, and yet we only feed 30 million people in the world each year, which makes no sense. The country that feeds the most per capita with the least amount of land in the world per person is the Netherlands. Very small country, big population, almost no space, and yet they produce an enormous amount of food because they use agri-tech. Smart farming, lots of vertical farming, lots of really specialist knowledge, using technology, producing really great products, shifting it out really quickly out across the borders into Europe. And they as a country are overperforming, even though everything works against them in terms of what's their natural assets. We have all the assets, but we don't have the kind of the ambition to say, what would it look like if we really said agri-tech? Let's put every bells and whistles so that we could get the best yield, the best scalability, that we only grow the things that naturally grow here really well. We focus on IoT across everything. We look at AI so we can kind of predict markets. We can sell to the best markets. We can kind of position ourselves with brand. So that, to me, first of all, we start with what do we do well, and then we absolutely put as much technology to get the advances that we possibly can, which means attracting the right people. So then when we go out and talk to the global market about investment, they're like, you're doing something you already do well, but now you're doing it even better. And I think companies like Holter are a great example of that. They took what we're known for and they put all the overlays of technology and AI and have gone out and done extraordinarily well. I think on top of that is we also have to go, what else can we do well outside of that? Now, there's lots of things we can apply to tourism and experiences and things that you could argue, but I don't know that's the answer either. I think we've got to think about if we are a knowledge economy in the future, what does a knowledge economy, what do we know a lot about? The best wine in the world, and we figure out how to put that at scale. Is it that we take, instead of shipping raw timber across and bringing it back as furniture, can we create ways of doing new ways of using these products that we have? But then actually, how do we build tech first companies, so software companies at scale to solve global issues? And I think we need to probably look at the things that are less sexy. Sometimes the things that are less sexy have better scalability because no one wants to, the typical founder wants something that they can be really like, look at me, I'm doing this really super cool thing. But what if it's just some weird little thing that someone needs that problem solved, and it's a process or an application that just does something that's a really pain point or a mental load for others? I think that's the sort of stuff we need to do. We can't copy what comes out of the US and China in terms of trying to be another music app or another video app or another, those are all taken by people who are well-funded. But what if we could do it in things that were around human problems and actually thinking about what that means? The one thing I think we have over every other country in the world is that people trust us. There's an enormous amount. We are like the Switzerland of, for money, people trust Switzerland to put their cash. If we use trust to our advantage in information and data, even things like cloud and infrastructure, if you think, if we put it in New Zealand or we develop it in New Zealand or if we partner in New Zealand, we trust that the people doing it are going to do the right thing by us. Then they're not corrupt. They promise what they promise, they deliver. They're pretty good jokers. Let's go with them, because we don't want the hassle of having to manage a relationship that is potentially going to go a bit pear-shaped because they've got different values. So values and trust, I think, is something we probably don't see enough kind of leverage of in this country. And AI, of course, with misinformation, disinformation, deep fakes, all the rest, trust is pretty important right now.
Well positioned for that. I suppose not as a challenger question, but just thinking it through, if you say I agree, we should be moving towards more of a tech-based business economy in some way, shape or form, whichever industry, as you say, up for grabs. how do we ensure that, we could start off with local funding to get us from 0 to 1 and to get us to the first 7 or 8 figure sort of number. Then we get to a point where the capital isn't sufficient in New Zealand. And then we have to look overseas for VC funding. We would tend to look to the US. We might look to Australia, but limited funds there as well, relatively speaking. If we start to look overseas and those funds come back into New Zealand for us to invest with, but then the returns actually end up overseas offshore, how do we sort of reconcile that, I suppose? I mean, at the end of the day, we need to create winners within this country to inspire the next generation and so forth. But how do we think about growing the kind of proverbial pie within New Zealand around capital that means that more businesses can proliferate and experiment in both local and overseas markets without all of the winnings going overseas?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing is you said the word winners. New Zealand is really uncomfortable with the word winners. They want everybody, it's all very egalitarian. You can't back a winner. Like we have this idea that, tall poppy is a really very true thing and it still continues. My view is if you look, and I'll use space industry. We were the 14th country in the world to have a space agency. We have the world's only space minister, Minister Collins. We have created a mechanism to bring in huge amounts of funding into Rocket Lab, massive offshore funding. And yes, so much of that funding and the benefit of that funding is going offshore. But off the back of it, so many people who started in places like Rocket Lab have spun out other startup companies and are doing extraordinary things. So sometimes when you start in those companies that are really growing, you create the mindset, you understand the process of growing big business, and you see it because you've lived it. And the same thing happened with TradeMe and Xero and a whole bunch of other companies that actually the people who are on the ground at that startup phase in the first few years, and they saw the hustle and they saw how the investment came in and they saw the skills needed and the people that were brought in to supplement local skills, people then got excited about what I could do that. I could be the next person who does that. And the same thing, I mean, Peter Beck cut his teeth in New Zealand companies before he created Rocket Lab. And if you look at how many people have become very successful entrepreneurs who came out of other very successful entrepreneurial kind of businesses, then I think the money flows back because then you get the next round and then the next round and the amplification continues. So again, that means that people will stay because you'll have a next generation of people starting up businesses with a view of being a global company based in New Zealand. And they may stay here for 10 years and then they offshored somewhere else, but they leave a big, long trail of people who are really capable. And if they stay, then we get it again. So we get another go.
That flywheel does continue and it starts from somewhere. I suppose then how do we inject more of that to create more of those flywheels? Like what are we missing today to galvanize more entrepreneurs? As you say, Holt has done a great job, Sarah did a great job, TradeMe did a great job, Rocket Lab, etc. How do we facilitate more and more of that?
Yeah, I think it comes back, you have to back winners. So I'm highly frustrated when we'd often shoot down winners before we congratulate them. So I think one of them is this cultural aspect of, can we just talk about things in a really positive way about how successful, because starting a business and hiring a lot of people, and if you're responsible for hundreds of staff and you've done it as a founder you're not a corporation that's come into the country, you've done it and you've ground up, there's a huge responsibility those people have. They don't do it lightly. And then they turn around and get to the whole tall poppy of, that is really truly unhelpful. And you'll know if you've lived in the US or in actually almost any other market, almost the exact opposite applies. Like people push themselves up and tell them how good they're doing and how successful they are, how much they're actually contributing and how their GDP is going to be changed because of them, or at least they're kind of, there's this a much greater acceptance of success. And I don't mean we should all be out there kind of being cheerleaders of our own work, but I think it's unhelpful when we knock people back prematurely. It also means, in translation, if you are an investor and as a humble Kiwi company, you say, oh, I'm pretty good at what I do, knowing you're absolutely brilliant at what you do, they assume you're already overhyping it because everybody else does. So they're assuming you're actually pretty damn terrible at what you're trying to sell. And so it's a kind of perception. It's kind of like, so we've kind of our own worst enemy in that way. I do think the other thing is we haven't had an easy pathway to look at what stories there are to invest in New Zealand, what businesses. And I'm really thrilled to see that Invest New Zealand, so what was once called Investment New Zealand is now Invest New Zealand, has been stood up at the moment. And so that means we will have an agency again who will help facilitate the matching game between interested parties who want to invest in the country and companies looking for money. When that was not around. It was really hard. I'd have friends who would be coming into New Zealand saying, "Hey, I'm really interested in the ecosystem in New Zealand for investment. Who can I talk to?"
Mm.
And I would have to get on the phone and ring a whole bunch of friends asking who was looking for money and how prepared, and did they have a pitch deck available? Were they open to welcoming investors to come through their factory or their business? And a lot of businesses weren't. They weren't sort of fit for investment conversations because they hadn't really thought it through. So I think that's part of the other part, is where the businesses have to be ready for investment. So they can't sort of have someone who is a seasoned investment person coming to a company and saying, "Okay, tell me about your pitch deck, tell me what you've done, tell me your growth," and actually having the story ready to share. We're a little bit naive, I think, sometimes, where we get them in and we're like, have a cup of tea and sort of talk it without having the documentation to back it up. And I've heard this a lot from investment friends, particularly out of the US, when they've come here and just said it felt like there was no preparation before I arrived. I was expecting to come in and be able to go through the details of the numbers and really talk about what kind of returns that I'd be getting if I put money in. And they were sort of talking about how good they were at sort of how much of a market share they got, but not about the big growth story. So there's some cultural differences that we need to probably address if we want to play really clearly in those markets where there's a huge level of maturity, and money and deals are just so much bigger than what we have here.
I was going to say it's that maturation of the market, and I would imagine even 10 years ago we're a completely different startup or tech ecosystem to what we were previously. And I suppose then, so looking ahead, if you were to paint two pictures for us, two futures, you've got one where New Zealand gets AI right in some way, whatever we want to describe that as, and one where we don't. What do you think that single fork is in the road about whether we are successful with it or whether we fumble the ball?
Well, we have an even bigger challenge which feeds into this. So the whole world, almost the whole world, has got a challenge with a declining birth rate. I think there's less than probably 5 countries in the world that's not true. Some are declining faster than others. Our demographic shifts are one of the fastest changing demographics in the world right now. So we have now only 4 people in the workforce earning tax money to pay to the government to distribute. And we have 4 people to every 1 retiree. So forget spending money on education and infrastructure and health and all the other things we need. Just to pay for a pensioner, we've got 4 people to 1. In 10 years, we're going to have 3 to 1, and then go ahead a little bit further, it's going to be 2 to 1. So 2 people working for every retiree, forgetting everything else. So we have one of the biggest challenges in terms of, if we aren't a high income country by the time that happens, with jobs that are really highly valued, paying significant tax to the government, where will the money come from for New Zealand to just operate at a basic level of medical, health, education, etc.? And so every other country that's had that huge decline of birth rate early on, Japan's a really obvious example. So South Korea and China and Portugal and France and a whole bunch of others, they have digitized and become more technical, more advanced, more quickly than other markets, because they've already done the math and gone, oh, if people's average income here is still so low by comparison to even Australia, so you might have 2 people working, but if they're only earning minimum wage because they're doing mostly manual work, then we are really in trouble. If they're earning $250,000 salaries, and we've got everybody able to achieve that level, regardless of their cultural background, regardless of whether they're a new migrant or were born here, if we have set it up so that we have a knowledge economy with a high wage, then the future could look pretty good. However, that would mean digitizing yesterday to a level we've never seen. It would mean AI adoption at a level we can't even predict. It would mean infrastructure to support sort of sectors that we need to bag, and investment flowing globally into this country like we've never had. And so the changes about what we're going to see over the next 10 or 20 years are already painted. We know the demographics. These kids are born. We know in 20 years exactly what a composition looks like. We also know the decline, that women are having less, on average 1 child per person, and people are leaving when they're young and skilled and talented at a huge rate to Australia. So I have this really great fear we're not moving to a macro view, using all the data points available to us and using all the exemplary kind of countries where they've had similar challenges and what they did and where the investment was put in to help ensure that the population that stays is so highly skilled that actually the companies that form around them are exciting, dynamic, well paid, so they stay. It attracts migrants because they're like, whoa, great place to live, New Zealand, but also you earn good money, interesting jobs, cool companies. Let's be part of that. But right now, all of those are the opposite of that scenario. And so, yeah, I have to say, I mean, I'm an optimist on almost everything in my life. This is the one thing where I look and say, where is the thought? Where is the leadership? And why are we not having these hard conversations about what we're going to look like in about 15 years? It's going to look nothing like it does today.
And it's only going to accelerate, as you say, that divide we've seen, that's only going to rapidly increase in width, comparing us to other countries as well, which is a pretty stark reality when you think about where we are today and where things could go if we don't do something pretty quick. But I appreciate the time, Frances. I would love to finish off with a quick fire round before we say goodbye, if you're up for it.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Would love to hear, are you ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini?
Now Gemini.
Now
Actually, to
Gemini.
be honest, my favorite is Manus. So I'm really honest, I use Manus more than any other, but Gemini is I've moved away. It's my, Manus or ChatGPT. Sorry, Gemini or Manus.
Gemini for Copilot working, Manus for tasks and agents.
Pretty much, yep.
What's the most overhyped AI trend for you right now?
Video. Prompt to video, still really clunky.
Not a fan of VO3?
Not yet.
Not yet. Maybe VO4 when it comes.
Yeah, and maybe if it's running for more than 7 seconds at a time.
Yeah, none of this TikTok sort of length videos are no good. What's one New Zealand company that's quietly doing some great work in AI that may not be on the radar of many people?
No, none actually come to mind at the scale I'd love to be able to say, but I think there's a lot of people who are starting to show some good progress, but I'd love to check in again in 6 months on that one.
Oh, any particular industries that you can share?
I think all industries going to have an outlier. I think we're going to see it across health. I think we'll see it across retail. I'm sure there will be an industry leader in the next 6 months in every vertical. There will be a standout. It's just, I think right now the people I'm talking to, they're not quite there yet, and they're not quite well funded enough yet. If they get the funding, if they've got the trajectory, they've got the mindset, I think we'll see some real standouts.
Epic. Looking forward to seeing those come to life. And for those that are perhaps just getting started with ChatGPT, they might be struggling to get it to stick as a mental kind of muscle or a habit. What's your number one recommendation for really embedding down that habit for people?
I think the first one is just playtime. Go to a tool, just choose ChatGPT, go to the free mode. You don't need to pay for anything. Actually have ChatGPT parties, sit around with your friends on a Saturday afternoon and ask to do the most outrageous things. Who can produce the best image? Who can produce the best, funniest sort of poem or the best story or the best, whatever it is. Just play with it, because I think when you play with it, you realize what it's capable of, and then you can start thinking about the work implications. So if you really are a beginner, don't sort of feel like you've got to go and do the hard things first. At the beginning, we were all, creating music and songs and doing lots of good little fun things to show our friends. Go back there and start that again. And if you know that stuff and there are people in your family who haven't started the journey, spend some time with them and let them learn from what you've learned as well, and go about it in a fun way, because then you'll get them on board.
I love that. It really aligns to where the data is recently from ChatGPT. Around 70% of tasks are non-work related, which completely aligns to what you're saying, is just go back to doing your normal kind of day, and how can it help you make your day more exciting, or to help you be more creative in your kind of activities with family or friends. So thank you for that, Frances. Really appreciate you joining us today. And thank you to our listeners. Please subscribe to the channel for weekly episodes and to hear more from the people building New Zealand's AI future. Until next time, thanks for tuning in to the AI Corner.